What do you say, Brian? You ready to kick this off?
Yeah, let's do it.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rebecca Brover. I'm a partner with Holacracy One, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Brian Robertson, co-founder of Holacracy One, often credited as the inventor of Holacracy, although he would beg to differ, and author of the book. So welcome, Brian. I'm so excited we're doing this. This is
Rebecca.
yeah. So
I like this topic in general. This is
yeah, it's meaty.
near and dear to my
Meaty
heart.
topic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So before I get into, fair warning, I've come up with a trio of introductory questions, which I'm calling my intro-eduction for you. And before I get into that, just a couple of logistics. If you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat at any point. I will be curating them, and if it fits to add it in, I don't want to wait till the end. So do add your questions as they surface for you. We will share a recording, so if you missed something or you'd like to hear something again, we'll send a recording out to all participants following today's session. And one last thing, the last thing is, once today's session is over, you'll likely receive just a brief survey. 1 minute, take 1 minute, if you would, to share a little feedback or a lot of feedback with us on how we can better serve you as Hellocracy One, maybe what you'd like to see at the next webinar, or maybe something you loved about today's session. We'd love to hear from you, and your responses do inform what we do next. So with that said, Brian, leadership. This is a big, juicy topic. So to kind of get started for you, I've got 3 questions I would love for you to just riff on.
Sure, cool.
1, what does leadership mean to you when you hear leadership? I looked it up, Harvard Business Review, apparently there are about 15,000 books on leadership with thousands of articles coming out each year. So I'd love to hear what it means to you. Maybe if an answer to what makes a good leader. What do you think makes a good leader, specifically in the perspective of self-management and holacracy? And then the third one is if you could maybe touch on distinctions you make or similarities you see between leadership and management. Go for it. Just a couple.
I think I need to start by confessing I really hate the word leadership. Here I am talking about it for an hour, but I really hate the word. I think it's because the words I love are words that have a crisp, clear definition. They make a distinction, and the distinction is nuanced and useful. And when I hear leadership in our broader business culture now, it's so vague. It doesn't mean anything specific and concrete and nuanced anymore. I mean, not to say it doesn't to anyone, maybe it does in your definition or someone else's, but there's not a common language anymore. It's such a broad word, which to me makes it actually not that useful. It means too many different things to too many different people now. But that said, I think one of the things I can say is if you look at the way leadership is often thought of in conventional business, it's somehow, I think it has some connotations, like it's leadership of other people that often is baked in there. Doesn't always mean that. Again, it's a word that means many different things to many people, but often it has that connotation. And that just doesn't make much sense to me anymore. And it's often fused with management hierarchy where you're thinking leadership of other people who then follow you. And I don't know, that to me seems kind of mundane. Like we all do that, right? We all lead in ways that others follow sometimes. And I think the more we get into self-management and holacracy, the more we leave behind this idea of one person who leads other people generally, right? We instead have roles. And when we are leading our roles, different definition, when we're leading our roles, others tend to follow the decisions we make in our roles while they're in their roles. And vice versa, right? I might follow them in their roles when they're making decisions in their roles and leading those. So it's just so, I don't know, it's strange to me to talk about leadership in terms of leading people. I think it's much more interesting to think about leadership in terms of self-leadership. How do I lead myself, my own decisions? I might use that synonymously with like conscious decision-making, conscious action. How do I be more conscious? How do I be a better self-leader? right? I find that to be a more useful frame on the word. Or how do I lead my roles? How do I lead my work? How do I lead my projects? And by that, I don't mean other people, but my choices, you know, to get my outcomes that I care about in my roles. So, you know, in those definitions, I think are more interesting to me. And when you look at something like Holacracy, that's the point. That's what everyone does. It's kind of mundane, right? Leadership to me is kind of boring because it's the thing we all do all the time. It's like talking about breathing. It's important, right? Let's keep doing it. But it doesn't strike me as profound. It strikes me as a really great, useful thing. Sometimes putting my attention on my breathing can be really helpful. And it's mundane. We all do it. We all do it all the time. And I think the same is true with leadership in a company that's functioning well with a holacracy power structure, right? You've got leadership, everyone's doing it, we're leading our roles, we're leading ourselves, we're leading our decisions and driving towards our outcomes. There's a lot more we can say about it, but I guess just as a broader frame, when I talk about leadership, I'm not talking about leading other people directly. I mean, that's sure they follow sometimes. I'm talking about leading self and role. Leading choices, making conscious decisions. And I'm talking about the thing everybody does. This has nothing to do with lead links. This has nothing to do with former managers specifically. It does have to do with them, but no more or less than anyone else, right? It's just the thing we all do now. And maybe some of us do it for more nuanced, difficult roles. And that's fine too. That's natural. Some of us fill harder roles or more comprehensive roles. And the burden of leadership might be higher for those people in those roles. But that's not to say others don't lead their roles and their work as well.
Mm-hmm. So when I hear you kind of framing your views on leadership and maybe your definitional piece, the words that come to me are driving, like to drive forward, rather than the connotation of leading other people. I drive my role forward. I'm an entrepreneur within my role. Yeah. I manage my role, even though the often general misconception of holacracy and self-management is that you toss out the skills you've learned in leadership, however you define it, or management, and you do something different. So when you think about driving roles forward and this conscious decision making as it pertains to holacracy, what do you find? Maybe let's expand my second question of what are those traits you see as beneficial or ways of being, habits that are beneficial? And also, where are the pitfalls? I know sometimes what's really useful for people is to hear, where can I take what I have that's good and accidentally apply it poorly in a new paradigm?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I think of when I think of what makes somebody a good leader in this kind of frame that I'm holding for it, is you need a really good conscious individual management practice to manage your own commitments, your choices, the actions you want to get done. So for me, that translates to GTD, or getting things done, or something a lot like it. You've got to have a good individual management system, right? If you can't consciously keep track of all of the many possible outcomes you're working towards and all of the next actions that you're wanting to get done, then I don't trust your leadership. You know, that to me is kind of baseline. So we need good individual management practices for our actions and projects. And I haven't found anything that comes close to GTD yet. I know there are other methods out there, and again, it really doesn't matter what you use as long as you get to that kind of ability to consciously hold everything on your plate and consciously direct your attention to the most important thing in every moment. So that's one, you know, having that kind of baseline practice. And then I think it might also be interesting at some point to look at, okay, so what about in holacracy, there is this lead link role. They're often filled by former managers, and there are some pretty major differences between what we expect of that person and what we expect of a manager, but also some overlap. So that might be interesting, just a placeholder to dig into at some point. And the other thing I think you asked about principles that would be interesting to dig into is how do you lead when it comes to others, right? When you need something from others, when your work touches others. Think about a good practice like GTD, you can self-manage all of your work and commitment, and that's great until you're dependent on somebody else. And this is where Hellocracy really comes in. As soon as I need something from you, now I might have the best GTD practice in the world, but things could still fall apart, and my ability to lead is now dependent on a practice beyond my own individual management. And that's where it comes into, how do I use Holacracy to lead my role well? And what are the habits and practices of how I lead when I'm dependent on you, when I need something from you? So I'd love to dig into that too. Where do you want to take
No,
it?
that's actually perfect. I had a note, I wasn't particularly tied to my introduction. I really just wanted to get you talking. But there are a couple of things I do want to kind of move now into a note I'd taken next for, okay, so you want to lead me. One of your roles wants to, in some way, influence my action or decision-making in my role. I want to dig into that next, but I also want to call out something really cool that you mentioned around trust.
Mm-hmm.
In a hierarchy, you don't have to trust anyone because your boss tells you what to do, and you do what your boss says because your boss has been imbued with that authority to tell you, to, in some sense, direct your work, direct your decision making. And you mentioned that if someone you're working with doesn't have a good self-management system, you are less likely to trust their decision making. That's in one sense so powerful because you now have that choice in a way you don't necessarily have in a management hierarchy. But at the same time, it's so much more responsibility because you do have to ground around that and thoughtfully consider how, am I trusting? The rubric for trust is so different, and therefore it takes a lot more energy.
It does, and it's hard. You can't just rely on, complain to your manager and wait for them to play savior and go and solve the problem, right? You have to be the manager in every case, right? Like, you have to figure out how to drive to the results you want, and you have new tools to do that with Hellocracy in the environment. I'm kind of thinking maybe now would be an interesting time to introduce the drama triangle, and then
sure, yeah. Let's
that'd be fun.
Let's do that. You want to share your screen with us?
Yeah, let me do that. Okay, so this, I'm sure many of you have heard of this. It's a really, really common model, Cartman drama triangle. But there's also another variation on this model as well.
We can't see it, Brian. We see your other screen.
Yeah, no, I know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is the Cartman drama triangle. It's a really simple model of like a common dynamic, right, that we humans tend to fall into, a common pattern where one person plays, I'll just start with victim, right? One person kind of feels like, poor me, they feel powerless, they feel like a victim, and there's often a sense of them with that. They are in the way, right? The point often comes with complaints and complaining and a sense of powerlessness. And I see this in management hierarchies all the time, right? This is the stereotypical frontline employee is in a vulnerable position in that kind of system, and it's very easy to fall into victim mode. And often when there's a victim, somebody else is cast in the role of persecutor. And it's not to say that the sequence is necessarily that, it could be the opposite, but the persecutor role is, they're kind of really focused on the problem. There's some issue here, there's some problem, and there's gotta be somebody that's kind of at fault then, and so there's a lot of—
Who's to blame?
Who's to blame? Yeah, who's at fault because of this? And often the persecutor sees themselves not as a persecutor, but as the misunderstood hero, right? They're there trying to improve the system. They're there trying to get good results for the client or whatever, and something is wrong and somebody's in the way, right? Somebody's not doing what they should or what they're supposed to, right? And so there's a blaming kind of energy in this. Even if they hold in the verbal blame, you can often feel when somebody's in that pattern, right? There's judgment leaking there.
And they're looking around for where can I place that responsibility.
Yeah, exactly, right? And this often gives rise to a third point, a rescuer or a savior, who is really empathizing with the victim and says, well, poor you, oh my God, let me help you, let me support you. Let me take care of you and solve your problem for you. Often, it's interesting, managers end up sometimes cast as persecutor, and sometimes they end up playing rescuer to some broader problem in the system or some broader executive level or whatever it is, right? So, and the pattern just tends to recreate itself. As soon as somebody goes and plays one of these points, it tends to really reinforce the other points, So, and usually people don't intend this, but this is such a common pattern in human dynamics, and I see this in organizations all the time. I think it's really interesting to now look at this through a lens of leadership and holacracy, because each one of these points can shift from the drama of this, right, which is not a leadership position, to taking more responsibility within the point they're in, but shifting the energy of that to something much more productive. And that's something that I think is a fundamental self-leadership skill. How do you recognize when you're getting pulled into one of these points and shift out of it, right? Like I know for myself.
I want to highlight that there because you say it quickly, but it's not easy. It takes a level of self-awareness to recognize. I'm still challenged with it sometimes. It takes a level of self-development and awareness to step out of the situation and recognize I am in savior space. I am in victim space. And then do something about it and shift to, I think, what you're going to show us next.
Yeah, totally. And whether it's Hellocracy or any environment, I think this is a fundamental skill of self-leadership, is how do you recognize this and how do you shift? And then also knowing ourselves helps here, because I think different people find different points here easier to get stuck in. You know, like for me, persecutor earlier in my career was the place that I would get stuck very easily, especially as a CEO in a management hierarchy. But even not, you don't have to be a CEO to be in that role. I would do that even when I was on a frontline level. I wanted to get results, and I wanted the system to be productive and healthy and effective. And I cared about the purpose we were serving passionately, right? But the downside of that, I would often end up, when something wasn't going as well as it could, when the purpose was getting stuck somehow, I get easily frustrated with people, you know, easily go to this like sense of blame energy. And so I don't recognize.
Interesting. That frustration you mentioned, I felt that too, and my personality goes right to rescuer. I'm so frustrated this is happening. If I could just do it for you, if I could just help you or take a piece from you and save the situation, save the dynamic, we could just move forward. So it's a similar frustration, but that manifestation is so uniquely personal.
Yeah, I remember when I first found this model, I was way early in my career, and I was brand new to this company, and there was somebody playing victim in a deep way, and I got sucked into rescuer myself in that case. And I remember how that felt and how easy it was to slide there, to like want to take care of this person and help them. And I saw ways.
It feels good. It can feel really good.
Yeah, I felt important. You know? Yeah. So, you know, it's such an easy point to slide to. And that was a huge wake-up call for me when I found this model early on. And I realized that I was actually reinforcing their victimness by playing rescuer there. You know, and so anyway, so then another model I ran across a while back, but many years after this, was a model called the empowerment dynamic, which looked at the positive sides of each of these, right? And that's here. So instead of the victim, right, the powerful space there is the creator, the one that owns their own power in the system. It says, I can still choose how I respond, whatever's going on around me, whatever vulnerability is there in this position, I can still make choice. And I can still co-create the system I want to see here, right? What outcomes do I want? I can see myself as in the system, not outside of it and subject to it. I can put myself in it and drive change, you know? And it's still a similar point, but instead of the just negative stuck energy, it's now moving forward, it's productive, it's a more powerful stance. And instead of the persecutor, we get challenger, right? And this is, for me, was one of the major lessons of my career, of how easy I would earlier go to persecutor, and then what could I do with that energy? I didn't want to just stop trying to improve things, right? Like I still wanted to have a really healthy,
that frustration is still going to be there. You still need to do something with it.
Yeah, totally. Right. So for me, this was a major learning of how do I shift from the blame energy, but still hold the space of, no, I want things to be better. And I can own that without the blame, and I can challenge the system and others within it. And I can do that without any sense of judgment and blame and harshness to it. But I can do that from love and care and passion for what I care about here, right? The purpose, the results, the system, and the other people in it. And I can still challenge from that energy. You know? And then finally, instead of rescuer, we have coach. We have the one who says, you know, I see you maybe in this victim space, possibly, but I believe you have the ability to get yourself out of it and to achieve the results you want yourself. But maybe you want some support. Maybe I can help, but I'm not going to do it for you. right? I'm going to offer you assistance. I'm going to ask you good questions. I'm going to clarify things for you by asking questions, right? I'm going to call you to your own power and your own action. I'm going to hold up a mirror, right, to where you are and maybe what you could do, but not by doing it for you or telling you. And I'm going to help evoke it. And sometimes holding up a mirror to the person and persecutor as well, to pull them back to the positive challenger stance. So, and this is a very virtuous dynamic. When you have people in these points, they tend to work really well together to improve the system. And now, if I can bring a Holacracy lens to this, I find this really interesting. I think Hellocracy itself tends to create a force towards this version, the powerful version, where I think management hierarchy actually does the opposite. The structure itself creates a force moving in the direction of the drama triangle. You can overcome that. You can still be a really great leader and not get stuck there, but it's almost like you're in this gravitational force pulling you down in management hierarchy. The power structure makes it really easy to tell yourself the story, I'm a victim.
Mm-hmm. You're in a situation of in spite of rather than because of.
Yeah, and not just for the victim point, but all of the points, right? As a CEO in that traditional structure, it's so easy to not look at the system problems, but to look at performance problems. People mistake system problems for performance problems in management hierarchy all the time, right? What's really the system not functioning effectively, it's so easy to see as, wait, okay, who wasn't accountable enough? Who's to blame? It's almost like the structure makes that, it hides the systemic dynamics. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Holacracy, it's hard to tell yourself the story, I'm a victim, I can't do anything, I have no power here. When some part of you knows, you can go to a governance meeting and you can propose changing anything in the organization. Now, you can still do it. You can still tell yourself the story, I'm a victim, and I've seen plenty of people do it despite Holacracy. But the system creates a force that makes it harder. It's like pulling you towards this. It's a reminder constantly, constant reminder. You still have to take your power stance, but the system, instead of reinforcing you're a victim, is reminding you you can co-create your reality here, right? Mm-hmm. And likewise, when I slip into persecutor, right, and I'm frustrated, somebody didn't do something, Allocates holds up a mirror and says, were they actually explicitly accountable for that? Right? Because if they're not, you have no right to expect that. So maybe instead of blaming them, you want to challenge the system to improve through governance.
That's so powerful of bringing it back to the self. Did I actually have any right to expect it?
Yeah, exactly.
That question, to be able to ask that question of yourself, that's one of the most beautiful differences I see between self-management and hierarchy because of the emphasis on clarity. And the more you can get clear, the more likely you are to have a truthful answer, your own truthful answer to, did I really have a right to expect that from you? And what do I do if the answer is no?
Yeah, exactly, right? And then even if there isn't explicit accountability, it still holds up the mirror to the next step. I still don't get to say, well, the person didn't do it. Now I have to ask, wait, did I make sure they had a project or an action? And did I ask about their priorities? Right? Because I don't have a right to expect that they followed my idea of priority, right? I can challenge their priorities, but I have to do that work. So, and it just keeps going until eventually the blame dissolves. Mm-hmm. You know, and I felt it. It's actually kind of frustrating when I want to be in blame, which sometimes
it's so much easier sometimes. It's so much easier to just blame someone.
It's simple, you know, but the system keeps reminding me, wait, did you do this next step? Did you do this? Until eventually I have to give up on the blame and say, all right, fine. You know, let me actually like do the work of really challenging the system and realize that the feeling of blame is about me, not about them. So, you know, what a powerful reminder. And at the same time, Holacracy gives you the tools to do that, you know? So I find with the challenger role that the tools I have are huge, right? I can go to somebody and in the Constitution, one of the basic duties, I can ask them, what's on your plate? Give me transparency. What actions or projects are you taking for this accountability or this role that I care about? Right? And then I can challenge their priorities and I can say, okay, well, where are you prioritizing this? And the beautiful thing about these questions, at this point, I can just ask questions and get some challenging done, right? Because if they haven't consciously defined that project or haven't consciously thought about their priorities, right? Now they kind of have to answer the question. So just by using the duties in the Constitution of transparency and asking them the questions, I'm challenging them. Mm-hmm. even if I have to go further, maybe they have answers and I don't think they're good answers. Now I can pitch them. I can say, well, I'd actually like you to consider this perspective. You know, what do you think? Are you swayed? And if not, I can further challenge the system. I can escalate it to maybe a lead link or a circle lead who can assess priorities if I disagree, right? Or I can go to governance to clarify the accountabilities if I think something is off, right? Or if we're interpreting them differently.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many tools. It's so easy to challenge in a really healthy way. And to me, that's an aspect of self-leadership. If you're not doing all three of these to some degree, you're probably missing an opportunity for leadership. And that's in any role, in any place in the system, right? There are times where we need to be a creator. Holacracy gives us tools for that, right? We can request projects and actions of others when we need them to do something in ours. We can go to governance and propose what we need to create and build the system we need.
Right. Even the simple act of sensing attention.
Yeah, that's an act of creation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you sense attention and then you do something, you take that step forward, you are in that creator role, you're creating something with your sensing.
And how much more powerful to do that than to complain, knowing that it may not go anywhere. Can you put that lens on coach? I actually see the Holacracy Constitution as a coach.
Yeah, that's
because it offers a structure that can't solve my problems for me. You and I have said this to countless clients when they say, well, what will Holacracy tell me to do about this? Finance or compensation. And sometimes our cheeky answer is, Holacracy isn't going to tell you what to do. It's just going to give you a structure to figure out what roles you need in place to make decisions, to figure out what to do. So in some ways, the structure of Holacracy is one of the best coaches within this dynamic and self-management. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that lens as it pertains to coach.
No, I love how you captured it. That's really cool. The system itself kind of acts as coach. And I think it invites all of us to take that role on much easier, you know, because we can ask questions. In fact, look at the governance meeting. The very first step after a proposal is presented is clarifying questions, which actually is very helpful. It helps clarify it. It helps coach in some way, especially when somebody's in a victim-y space. And sometimes you'll see a proposal, which is still somewhat in creator, but still has some victim energy in it, right? It's not all black and white. Sometimes there's a mix of both. And I find the clarifying questions, the right ones, can often help pull somebody more into owning that creative act.
I love that. And on the other side of that, that coach is also holding a boundary for a potential persecutor to dig in with, well, what about this? Why haven't you thought of this? Protecting the space for a proposer. For those of you who are maybe know a little bit more about Holacracy practice, you can't foist ideas on someone during clarifying questions. You cannot challenge. You may ask for additional information, and the proposer has an option to say, I don't know yet.
Yeah.
So
yeah, totally.
Don't slip back into that energy of victim space of, oh, I hadn't thought about it. I guess I should just give up.
Yeah, even the act of separating clarifying questions and reactions in the governance process kind of forces people that might naturally slide a little bit into persecutor, be a little triggered about the proposal and go right to reaction and blame, right, or whatever. It kind of forces them, or even might go right to rescuer, might go right to helping them with reactions.
What about this? Yeah, not all reaction.
Yeah, it forces them to go to questions first. Questions tends to naturally pull somebody more into a coaching energy, right? So, and that's just one example. I think there's a lot in there. Holacracy makes it easy to coach, in the same way it makes it easy to challenge. You know, I can ask somebody, oh, cool, so sounds like attention. In fact, I say that's right into coaching energy. When somebody's complaining and I sense a little victim energy, I'll often say, wow, sounds like you've got attention, and pause. And that pause is my invitation for them to realize, oh, that's attention. That feeling that is right now just showing up as body attention. That's attention, and I can do something with it. I can change something with it, right? And then I can ask them, so what are you doing with that tension? Or do you just want to complain and have a supportive ear? Because there's nothing wrong with that, but as soon as you ask somebody and they consciously choose that, ironically, they're shifting more into creator, right? And as soon as the complaining is a conscious choice, knowing no one's going to save them and it's their responsibility, but sometimes you just need to have permission to be messy and dump some complaints so that you can sort through that energy and get to what am I going to do with it, right? And
that act in and of itself is creation of space for yourself to get through the mush and to a place of a little more clarity or calm. I love that.
Totally. And so one thing I'd love to add here is just for people that are newer to Hellocracy or in this transition, one of the things I find beautiful about this is these points, this is everybody's role. This is no longer, something the manager should be the challenger and others should be the creators, or that doesn't make any sense in this frame, right? Same, even if you translate it to lead link and Holacracy or whatever, these are all roles we all fill. And in fact, if you have a lead link that's only challenging and not creating, they're a horrible fit probably for that role, right? And likewise, if you have somebody in the front line that's never challenging others, is only in creator, that's probably not good. Really, we all have times where our results are dependent on somebody else and something gets in the way. And sometimes we need to shift into challenger mode, right? And so Holacracy doesn't have this simplistic idea of the manager is the one that should be driving the overall results and others executing or something. And I know not every management hierarchy has that, but the structure almost seems to push there. Right? There's something built in towards that direction. With Holacracy, these are things we all do. We all get to play challenger when we need to for the results of our role. We all get to go create things when there's something in the way that we're vulnerable to other people's stuff or the system's stuff, right? And we all get to have an opportunity to serve as coach when we're called to do that, and others can use some help, So there's no longer anything special or privileged about the previous management cast here. Now we all have the tools,
So I love this. And for those of you that are interested, you can look up the empowerment dynamic. I'm looking at Brian's screen. He just looks like he found a couple of great screenshots or images for this. I want to shift now to what you mentioned earlier. Yes, there's nothing special, especially when you are a little further along in practice. But when you're newer to Holacracy, the previous managers, the previous individuals who have been imbued with leadership authority often translate to, if you're using Constitution 4.1, the lead link. If you're using Constitution 5.0 or aware of it, the circle lead. And the idea of a lead link circle lead as a manager is often conflated, but there are very key distinctions. So now might be a good time to dig into that a bit.
Yeah, in fact, I've got another graphic here I'll share. Here we go. So yeah, this is just a little infographic. It looks at like the difference and the similarity, because there are some things that do overlap, right? It's not entirely different, but so for example, some of the similar ones, managers often are in the role of providing feedback, right? And that's still true of lead links. It's less, I don't know, paternalistic when it's expressed well, I think. But they are looking at role fit. And that means sometimes they're gonna say, hey, here's what I'm looking for in the role. Or like, hey, I'm concerned we don't have a great fit for this role. What do you think? What can we do? So there is some monitoring of role fit that still happens here from the lead link. That's part of their job. And there's also a prioritization function, although again, this is maybe a little oversimplified or misleading because a manager often is actively driving priorities, right? There's almost a beating the drums, a directing, okay, go work on this. And a lead link isn't doing that. A lead link is almost there. The first line of defense in Hellocracy is everyone's prioritizing on their own, using their judgment, and working out priority conflicts with each other by sharing information and pitching each other. And when that doesn't work, and you need somebody to assess the relative priority between two things, that's the lead link's job. So it's a different kind of prioritization function than before.
Could you maybe give, for those people who are less familiar both with Holacracy and with that notion of relative prioritization, particularly coming from hierarchy where you can have a boss saying, this is the most important thing, maybe without all the information. Can you give us a little bit more on relative prioritization?
Yeah, so in management hierarchies, you'll sometimes see a boss just say, well, okay, work on this now. And the lead link has no authority to do that in Holacracy. Or you'll see a boss saying, hey, I need this by Friday. A lead link has no authority to expect that in Holacracy. But they do have the authority to judge the relative value between two things and to make a declaration of it. And then everyone else has an expectation that they're going to take that declaration as fact and use their own judgment to prioritize given that fact. So that sounds complicated, but it's a really interesting way to think about this. So for example, a relative priority is if I come to you and say, hey, Rebecca, which is more important to the organization, A or B? You don't get to just say, do A, right? What I'm asking is, when I need to, because maybe I'm working with someone else and he thinks A is more important and I think B, we can come to you together and say, Rebecca is lead link, which is more important, A or B? And you declare A is more important than B. And now we each have a duty to take that as a fact and prioritize accordingly.
Which
Right?
doesn't necessarily mean stop working on B right now.
It doesn't. I had this case not that long ago in my company. I was in the lead link role and somebody came to me with that. The two people disagreed. I said A is more important than B. And I found out a few days later, the person was still working on B. And so I asked him, what's up? And he said, well, I was 90% done with B. I took it as a given. A is more important than B, but it would have wasted a ton of time and energy if I stopped on B right now. So it still made more sense to me to finish B, and that's fine. That's in his authority to do, right? Now, if somebody really wanted to dig, they could say, which is more important, A, or finishing the last 10% of B to avoid wasting all this effort. And that would be a different relative priority I could assess and give as lead, right?
But it highlights what you were talking about earlier of that conscious self-decision making, that it wasn't take the boss's word as law and be an automaton that just does it. It's take it as fact and use your best judgment to align to it with what makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I want to call out the fourth line here, allocates resources. There is a difference here between version 4.1 of Holacracy and 5.0. In 5.0, this is no longer a default lead link function. There's a new process in 5.0, which is the new beta version of Holacracy that's going to be officially released in the next few months. So there is a difference there, but that is a function of lead link. But I want to highlight what's not a role of lead link, because I think that helps people really differentiate if you're new to Hellocracy. What doesn't a lead link do that a manager typically does? Right? For example, hiring, firing, directing work. None of these are functions. Setting pay. None of these are functions of a lead link. Lead link has no authority to hire or fire, no authority to go to someone and say, do this. They have to request projects and actions just like everyone else can, right? No authority to do those things, right? So there's a lot of difference here. I like to think of the lead link as just another role, right? Every role has real power in Holacracy. Sometimes people think, well, hey, they get to assign people to roles. That's a lot of power. And my answer is yes, yes it is. And so is every other role, right? The goal isn't to strip power away from the lead link in Holacracy. The goal is to raise power throughout the system, right? So yeah, the lead link has some major functions and they need to lead those. But in my company, we have other roles that define our compensation system. That's a lot of power. It has nothing to do with it. We have roles that decide what new markets should we enter for our product or our trainings. That's a huge amount of power. It has nothing to do with it. We have a role that defines our pricing model. That's a huge amount of power. It has nothing to do with lead link, right? Lots of roles have real power in our system, including lead link. They have a function to fulfill. And one of the most common pitfalls I see when people are new to Holacracy, and when they're doing it well, the lead links often, former managers say, oh, I know I'm not supposed to direct the work and get too involved as a top-down command leader anymore. So they go way back. They go hands off.
And the pendulum swings way
All
too
the way.
far the other way.
Yeah, basically they stop leading the lead link role, which still has a really key function on teams, right? And if you stop leading that role, you're missing something really important. There are things that lead link role needs to lead. So the challenge of adoption is to find a new way to lead for those former managers turned lead links that still honors and leads the functions of lead link without doing what they used to do and getting in the way of everyone else's ability to lead in this new paradigm. So there's an interesting learning curve for lead links here. And watch out if you are early in your Hellocracy journey and you've seen yourself or others swing all the way to the other side where the former bosses are really not doing much of anything, right? No, there is another, there's an integration. And when it's done well, lead link is still a small part-time job, right? It's 5 or 10% of your time maybe in a lead link role, right? Because their job, they don't do that much.
Right,
Most of the work
there's not a whole lot to do there.
No, yeah.
Especially if you've got great role fillers. If you've got a good team around you, there's not a whole lot you need to do.
Yeah, I fill 2 different lead link roles in our company, and I spend very little time in them. I have 20 some other roles that I spend a lot of time in, including roles in the circles that I'm the lead link of, right? But the lead link job itself, there's something not on this diagram. The lead link catches stuff that no one else does yet, that has no other role for it. I like to think of the lead link as the garbage collector of the circle. Wherever anything doesn't land in a nice existing basket, and falls to the floor, the lead link's job is to pick it up and hold it until you get another role defined to take care of it. But a good lead link is not just getting stuck doing that, they're creating roles. And then they're not doing that anymore. They've created a role to handle it. Right? So a good lead link, a lot like an entrepreneur, they're creating structure and creating clarity to get themselves out of it. Right? While at the same time, sometimes jumping in and weighing relative priorities and making sure you got the right people in the right roles. You can't tell them what to do. Can't tell them what to do in those roles or how to do the work, but you can make sure they have the right talent fit.
So I want to invite questions, and while I see a few of those coming in, Brian, I wanted to ask you, you just named one trait or piece of management skill, that entrepreneurial spirit, willingness to pick something up and figure out where it goes. Can you give me maybe a couple other examples of, okay, sure, I've been in management for 10 years, let's say, and in all likelihood, I've developed some skill. I have a good personal management system. What are some other translatable pieces from the best of management to Holacracy practice, and how might those translate to still serve me in this new paradigm? Because a lot of us have invested a lot of time in our careers.
Yeah. So let me add one more piece and then go to that, and it'll be a nice bridge to that too, just to share the rest of this little infographic of one of the key differences. To really get this, when you're in a Holacracy powered company, who decides what work to accept? In management hierarchy, often the boss decides for you what you're going to do, and that's not the case. It's up to you to assess, does this fit my roles, purpose, and accountabilities, right? Likewise, the how you're going to go about doing it, right? Boss doesn't have any right, has the right to expect that of management hierarchy. In Holacracy, the lead link has no right to expect that you're going to do it their way or the way they say. They have to propose governance if they want to expect something, which they can do. The lead link can propose governance to limit how you do something, just like everyone else. Any of your colleagues can do that.
That's so powerful. I want you to say that again.
Yeah, the lead link absolutely can propose governance to set expectations on you, to define how you need to do something or not do something. The lead link can definitely propose that governance, just like everyone else. Everyone can do that to lead their role. When they need to challenge you or challenge the system, they can propose governance and do that. So can the lead link, just like everyone else. It's not a special power of the position of manager anymore. Mm-hmm. All right. So, okay, cool. And so let me answer your question of skills that are still useful. One of the things I love about Hellocracy for me, I think a lot of people look at it as like a rejection of management as we know it, or like a parallel diversion. And I don't.
Misconception, absolutely.
It is. I look at it as a natural evolution to what we already want in a management hierarchy, right? Like as a boss, if you've been a boss or a manager in a management hierarchy, do you want to be the kind of leader that just directs all the action, micromanages, and creates lots of followers? Or do you want to be the kind of leader who creates clarity for people, gives them freedom to lead their function within clear bounds, with clear goals, clear expectations, but then doesn't micromanage, gets out of their way and lets them lead? Do you want to be the kind of leader who creates leaders instead of the kind that creates followers? What manager doesn't want that? And a lot of managers have built some skill in a management hierarchy of being a really empowering boss. Now, unfortunately, they're working in a system that makes that difficult, because if you need someone else to empower you, you're in a fundamentally disempowering system. Right? That's the ultimate irony. You can have the most empowering boss in the world. If you need the boss to empower you, you're already in a disempowering.
If you need anyone to empower you, you are fundamentally disempowered.
You're in a really disempowering environment. Mm-hmm. And so Holacracy solves that, but it's really giving tools for managers to do what managers want to do anyway. And most of them that I work with, right? We want to be the kind of leaders that create clarity, that challenge in a healthy way, but without micromanagement, that create a team where everyone can challenge each other. Who doesn't want that? When I was a CEO, I wanted a team where people would hold each other accountable and not just look to me, where they wouldn't complain, they'd help create and build, right? Where I didn't micromanage, I got clear boundaries and then I let them lead. This is what managers want. And the skill of building this is still useful in Hellocracy. What Hellocracy does is remove your crutch. It removes your ability to do the bad behaviors of micromanaging, directing the action instead of creating clarity. It's a lot easier to jump in and micromanage than to create clarity. Hellocracy removes your ability to do the destructive behavior because you don't have the authority to anymore. right? And it gives you help, it gives you a framework that supports you doing the healthy thing, and it gives you a whole team that's called to support the team doing that healthy thing, right? So in this way, I look at self-management, especially with Holacracy, as a natural evolution on management itself. It's not antithetical to it, it's perfecting it. And it's perfecting it partly by creating an environment that has the good practices so baked in that you can't do the bad ones anymore. And by inviting everyone to be part of it. It's management without the single point of failure of a manager. Everyone's invited to be part of management, even though you don't have managers as a single status role that can do all those functions. And you're also removing the traps, the micromanagement capacity and things like that.
Awesome. I'd love to go to a couple of the questions that we've gotten, and I'm going to read them out loud because most of them are coming just to us as the panelists. There's one here from Danielle. It says, I know in Holacracy, the lead link does not have the authority to hire or fire, but does have the ability to assign people to roles. We talked about that. If someone resigns from the organization and there's a vacancy, what's the ideal interaction between hiring someone and assigning them to a role from the perspective of Holacracy? And we have organizations doing this in lots of different ways. It would be weird if someone were hired for the org, but then not assigned a role. And I want to challenge that, and I would love for you to hear your comments. I actually don't think it's weird at all, but then again, I'm coming from a perspective of Holacracy practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think each organization needs to figure this out. Sounds like you've got attention around how this works.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah, I mean, and again, anything's possible. Maybe one organization realizes that's a problem, and they propose a policy that says no one may hire someone until they've identified a few target roles and lead links that are ready and willing to assign them to those roles. Right? We've never needed that in my company. Partly because it just happens. If lead links want roles filled and we hire somebody that's a good fit, they get filled. We've never needed a policy to constrain it, but it's possible. I mean, you could create that. And it depends on the functions as well. Sometimes we hire somebody without being totally sure what roles they're going to take. And that actually works sometimes, right? Often we have a whole bunch of people that are overloaded and that are generalists. It's not a specialized technical skill set, right? We have several people that are just smart, competent generalists. And when they're all overloaded, we look for another smart, competent generalist to come in, and we don't care. We just say, go find people who are overloaded and see what you can take off of their plate, and they do. Right? That works for us. That doesn't work when we need to hire a software developer, right? For that, we have a role that has highly technical skills required, and then our hiring process actually looks a little different for that. And in that case, it starts really with the lead link saying, I have a role vacancy, or I need somebody else here. We have the budget for hiring, so can we go find someone who's going to fit this role? And that's fine. You can do that when that's useful. And again, all this gets governed. There's no one ideal here. Every organization needs to find their own pattern. And even within a single company like ours, we're relatively small, it's different in different parts of the company, right? The way we hire generalists for our general management is very different than the way we hire a software engineer for our Glassfrog team, which is the software tool that companies use.
Right. I also want to call out an interesting distinction here. If someone resigns, this question specifies resigns from the organization. It may be that you don't need to hire someone at all. If they held roles and you can reallocate, you pick up those roles and give them to other folks that are already there, you may not need to hire at all. So there's an interesting distinction now, and important to make in Holacracy practice. Are you resigning from the org? Are you hiring to the org? Or are you resigning from a role or trying to fill a role? Because those are now not the same thing.
I've actually been surprised how many times in our company's history we've seen somebody left, and even when we thought we needed to replace them, in the meantime, often others will take on different roles. We split out
to hold the line. Sometimes we'll take on a role just to hold the line until we can get someone.
And then we often find, oh, actually we're making that work. We actually don't need to replace the person. And that's really interesting to find it. I think it helps us be way more efficient and get more done with less. Somehow people absorb it and they realize this other stuff I was doing isn't as important. So it just becomes a natural way to help us like stop doing the less important stuff. That doesn't always work. Sometimes everyone's like, oh my God, we're so overloaded. Please hire
someone right now.
Right, yeah. But it can go each ways. And I love that Hellocracy allows that organic process to find its fit. When do we need to hire to replace? Sometimes we do really quickly. Sometimes we don't ever. and it's just so much more organic in a way, and it's fluid.
And it ends up more efficient as a byproduct. There's a wonderful question here from Jennifer, and I think we've got just under 10 minutes left. This might naturally shift us to some closing thoughts from you. In your experience, what are the most important things for an existing CEO to keep in mind or pay attention to as they transition their organization to Holacracy? Are there communities of practice specific to leaders managing this kind of transition? I want to answer the second question, just a couple of offers of resources first, and then ask you to share some thoughts on the first question. Jennifer, there are numerous communities of practice for organizations adopting Holacracy, and on the whole spectrum of the journey from just starting to years into practice. I'm going to ask Jen Sposett, our partner here in the role of support, there's a support role, webinar support, to share a link to our community of practice and some other Holacracy resources that you can take a look at. We have some really wonderful webinars. We offer training events to help leaders transition their organization. We have a network of providers across the world that can coach your organization through this adoption. And we also have asynchronous learning platforms for some self-paced guided learning for entire organizations. So lots to share. Current largest organizational org successful with Holacracy practice, what size, what head count? Thousands. We'll get to that in a second, but let's go back, Brian, to that. Go for it.
Can I just add something to that question?
Sure, absolutely.
I just wanted to say, to echo what Rebecca was saying, get support. This journey it looks so much easier than it is. There's so much to learn. If you can get a good coach, that's ideal. But if not, at least get somebody to a training. Or we often do little 2-day workshops, even virtually now, to kick off with an executive team and help them really get a sense of what this is. And that's a nice thing before they even commit to doing it. Let's make sure they know what they're getting into. Let's, for 2 days, do it. And we can kind of take them through an experience of really what it's like and get a lot of teaching there. So at least they get a feel of the goal of where they're going for if they move on forward. And if they don't move forward, they've at least spent 2 days working on important issues in their business in a new way. So get help, whether it's doing one of those or going to a training or getting a local coach, get help. It's really, really hard. And it's hard to support just internally without the right expertise. It's more than just a mindset change. You have to roll out all different behaviors and habits. There are new rules. There's new ways to facilitate meeting processes. There's a lot here. It's very doable. When you have the right person rolling it out, there's a pretty smooth process available, but it does take a lot of expertise. Okay, can we go to Sylvia's question? I want to make sure we don't miss that. It was earlier. So everyone performs some kind of leadership, right? This is overall a matter of mindset, isn't it? Does the mindset need to exist before thinking of Holacracy as the right system? I love the question, and it goes to something I often talk about. Actually, I was just talking about this in one of our online trainings this week. This is, so there's kind of, yes, this is definitely about mindset. You need deep mindset change to sustain this where you really want it to be, to get the depth of this over the long haul. But I don't recommend getting there by trying to change mindset first. It's actually not the effective path from what I found. So generally 2 methods you can go about change. You can try to change people's mindsets and hope behaviors follow. Or you can try to change people's behaviors and hope mindset shift follows. Often, change agents realize the long-term sustainability is through mindset change. The mistaken goal is to start there. It is important, but if you start there, who likes to have their mindset changed? And how the hell do you do that, right?
And who's really open to it? If I were to come to you and say, Brian, I'd like to change your mind about something you feel deeply connected to.
Yeah, and even if you do, I might get you in theory and then go about my behaviors the old way and eventually say, this new mindset doesn't make sense, right? It's so hard to get lasting change. What works far better is to help somebody change their behaviors and then help them understand the mindset behind those behaviors. So you do still get to mindset change, but it's often counterintuitive, but it works better. So when we're rolling this out with somebody, we're focusing on behavior change. We're focusing on getting new habits, right? What do you actually do differently, new processes? And for that, it actually works better to adopt a system, a framework like Hellocracy, before you try to change all the mindsets. It will help you with the mindset change, and it will pave the way for itself, ironically.
No, that's great. And so we have, I'm putting in one of my favorite books, just take it for what you will. One of my favorite books on habit is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Great read, easy read, and it speaks to what you were just saying of broad, deep mindset changes are supported best by micro habit changes and the discipline required to make tiny behavioral habits that make big changes in the long run. So perfect timing. Advice, some Brian advice for existing CEOs, founders, leaders. What do you want to keep in mind or pay attention to as your organization transitions to Holacracy?
One thing.
Everything.
There's like 1,000 answers to that, but the meta answer is don't worry about all 1,000 things, right? Focus on one thing at a time. Roll out one piece, one behavior, one habit, one pattern, and recognize this is a long-term journey. This is not a road that you walk in a few months. This isn't a, how do we adopt this for next quarter? This is a multi-year change. How long does it take you to master being a really empowering manager in a management hierarchy? It takes at least that long to master Hellocracy. That doesn't mean you don't get ROI earlier. You do. You get ROI pretty quick with it. But it is a long-term journey, and it's best approached that way, right? So start where you are. Don't get daunted by the whole journey. Don't look at everything you need to change. Start where you are and take one step. Whether that one step is, join a training or call us or find a local coach or, do something on a pilot team, or I don't know, but take a step and then take another step and another step.
Yep. Awesome. Well, we have 2 minutes left, but I'm okay. I think that is a great place to stop. So please feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions. Jen, if you could put the email address to connect with us and our website in the chat, although I'm sure you'll get it in a follow-up email. Brian, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Always fun chatting with you about deep stuff. Thanks everyone too for joining. I love the questions and the engagement, and I hope this has been valuable.
Thank you all so much, and we're done. Have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, or evening. Bye.
Bye.